Most people look at constellations and see stars. I saw inspiration. I'm Adam from Dirty Roots Berlin. For over 25 years, I've been growing indoor plants, and for the last 7, I've been running a creative studio where we focus on plants as an artistic medium. We also make these really cool sphere planters. Today, I am going to be planting up 2 of the new planters in our Cassiopeia collection that is just coming out. As I talk about the inspiration behind the collection, to give you a little bit deeper insight into why I created what I created. The idea came from a few experiments, as well as trying to improve upon one of our most popular and one of my favorite designs. And so we had the design called Kepler, and I wanted to create a collection that utilized a lot of the rocky, dark aspects of it, but had a lot more character. There's also now some rivers of color. We've got red and green in here, which I really like, and some swirls of white and silver, which I think to me is a really nice representation. If you look at Cassiopeia as a constellation, a lot of the newer photos that are coming out are showing these gaseous red clouds in there. And I like to think, though while a lot of this may not be in colors we can see, that I interpret them into colors that we can and sort of express them through a few of the extra designs that are going on in here. But realizing that throughout most of any starscape is a vast amount of black void. So the darker colors in here represent that. The rocks represent different elements in the gaseous dust and clouds. I'm sure that there are all sorts of elements that are coalescing to create new, whether it be stars or planets, things that we don't know yet. So that's the different elements and kind of how that idea came about. And because there are 5 stars in the Cassiopeia constellation, I went with 5 spheres to represent those different stars. So I'm going to plant a larger one and a smaller one today. We're going to start with a small one. As a constellation, is quite beautiful, and I appreciate sort of the Greek mythology behind the choosing of the name Cassiopeia. There's an emotional connection in that I'm very fascinated by space, and Cassiopeia being a beautiful constellation. I think the moment things kind of came together was as the pieces were starting to come together, and I realized I was going to end up doing 5 in the collection. I then started looking for constellations that would match this, not necessarily just constellations, but groupings of 5 in space that would match what I was working with. And this was the most obvious one to me once I started building it. And then once I had that idea of Cassiopeia, I leaned into it more and pulled out elements, started thinking about how I wanted to represent that. And that is where the rivers of green and red started to come in, and silver as well, as those representations of extra aspects, and how I could take it from just the Kepler sphere into a whole line and a singular collection that is not going to be replicated again. What I could do that would be unique in a new fun way that I would not ever do again. I have been making sphere planters for a number of years. I really like spheres for a lot of reasons. I think spheres they're found all over in nature. However, maybe not on our scale nearly as much. We don't often see spheres on a human scale, but on the planetary, stellar, as well as much smaller scale. And I think that spheres are a very natural shape, And I think that it's a nice way to complement the plants, that all of the plants that we see grow on a sphere, right? So it's a representation of a celestial body, and we are on just another celestial body floating through space. We just happen to be one that grows plants. I just gotta find a way to get through this because this is tight, but that is okay. I think one, we're gonna have to get rid of more. And while I really like the sphere shape, I do think there are some challenges, obviously, that come with it, particularly as I've started experimenting with building sort of bridges and other things, holes and cracks, though it still leans very much into a lot of the things that I want to say. So I think because it's challenging in a lot of ways, it makes it more beautiful and more fun. And I appreciate the challenge. So this collection, the Cassiopeia collection, is different from previous collections in that, well, different than previous in that it is a collection. It's not going to be repeated. There's only five spheres in it. The other thing that really makes it unique is the construction of the spheres themselves. We've done rocky spheres like this before, but never with so many sort of bridges and holes to be filled. And so I think this is really a fun exploration that we're going to see a bit more of as I continue to play with more unique shapes and designs. And this was that sort of first departure from that, and that really is one thing that has been a great inspiration. Cassiopeia collection has more lava rocks than any other planter that I've made. I really like this. I'm starting to explore this a bit more in this design. And it also utilizes multiple pigments, which is not something I tend to do. The reason that I did that, though, was to represent the different aspects of the constellation, that even within the stars, there's this field of gas, and I find that to be very beautiful, and I wanted to represent the multi-dimensional aspect of the constellation. Of course, it's obviously made with a special blend of concrete that I use for all of the spheres, but less of that and more of the lava rock. So it's a fun exploration. I'm excited to see where things go, but for now, this is a nice deviation, really something that I find very beautiful, and I'm really excited to see how this looks once I plant up. Maybe I should stop talking so much and actually just plant the spheres. So, I mean, obviously I'm endlessly fascinated by space, and the sphere is a big representation of that fascination, just because spheres are something we see in space all of the time. The rocks and the materials sort of represent the things that we often find out in space. Although this is a constellation and a collection of stars, there's still many articles, celestial objects out there that will be made of a whole bunch of different elements. And I find that fascinating. So combining all of that, so while the stars are perhaps the main thing of the constellation, that when looking at the constellation, there are so many other aspects to it than just 5 stars. So that was represented by the fields of color and silver that run through it. I will say the process felt a bit different from other spheres that I've made because I knew that I was just making a collection. I decided at the outset I wasn't going to be making a whole bunch, and I think that really gave me more curiosity and helped me explore a little bit better and express a theme and a concept a little bit more clearly than perhaps I have with other spheres, where they may be vaguely represented celestial objects. I started actually using much more symbolism in the creation of this than I have done in the past. So, from start to finish, I would say the process took about 6 weeks. However, in reality, it took much longer than that. The inspiration for it took a while to form and develop. I knew I wanted to make a collection, but I really didn't know what the collection was going to be. I played around with some ideas, but nothing really was jumping out of inspiration. And there was one idea I had sort of been toying with, but thought would be too difficult. And that was sort of making these holes with the lava rocks. Over time, though, I started to figure out exactly a really nice way to do it that would be very well made, still very well displayed, but be able to last and function well. One of the many reasons I think that I tend to use this space as a source of inspiration is because it's a representation of what I am fascinated by. Not just space, although I am very fascinated by outer space and celestial bodies and constellations and exoplanets. I am also really fascinated simply by the fact that things exist. I was recently talking with a friend about the idea that the universe sort of just transfers energy from one form to another, that we know that matter cannot be created or destroyed, and that when we, in a sense, destroy matter, we release that energy, but that energy still exists, and that there's sort of a never-ending, never-decreasing supply of this energy, seemingly, as it is. And so I find this to be a great source of inspiration, and it's something that I like to think about endlessly. So that's, to me, the fact that then things do exist, which is pretty wild, and that in that existence, there seems to be a self-replicating experience that happens that we call life. Because those things coexist and exist at all, I stay up late at night thinking about how that can appear throughout our universe. Like, what are the different ways that our universe creates things that then self-replicate, but also change just a little bit as they self-replicate in order to grow and adapt to the situations that they happen to find themselves in. And we know sort of what that looks like on Earth, but even then, our knowledge is somewhat limited. Now imagine what that looks like in a world where, it rains methane ice, and I don't know, something fascinating such as that. So space is something I can always come back to and imagine, even when we don't know what's out there. It's because there's so much that we don't know that's out there. I can come up with anything, and it probably maybe somewhat exists something like it somewhere, because everything is so vast. The amount of stars just in our galaxy is mind-boggling, and the amount of galaxies in our observable universe is beyond comprehension. And so there are endless worlds. And so it's an endless area for me to find fascination and find inspiration. And all I have to do is look up at the night sky. So I hope that when you see it and feel it, that it inspires that same sense of wonder at the fact that anything exists at all, which is pretty cool to me. And I love that idea, and I really like sharing that inspiration and the fascination and the amount of energy and joy that seems to bring me. I like to share that, and I do that through creating sphere planters that represent that same inspiration and feeling inside of myself. And I hope that translates when people see and feel and interact with them. And I mean, really, the spheres are meant to feel very visceral and raw, that there should be some sense of chaos in this organized creation, that there is a power and force that is greater than us, that we are merely these small, tiny creatures on a very massive rock that is actually very, very small in comparison to all the other stuff that's out there. And it's just a reminder of our place in this really vast universe. They're meant to feel celestial, they're meant to feel magical, really just inspire awe and wonder beyond just being something to hold your plants. That they're really a sculpture meant to remind us of something outside of ourselves. I think a lot of people see sort of two different aspects of Dirty Roots Berlin. There's that leave it the fuck alone, soil biology kind of get your hands dirty. And then there's this outer space aspect that's sort of otherworldly. And to me, they're not. They're the same thing. I mean, from my mind and my perspective, Earth is nothing more than any one of the other planets. This one just happens to grow plants. My thinking of the leave it the fuck alone attitude is very cosmic in its origin, that it comes from the idea that we as humans are so small in the grand scheme of things that our concepts of how best to do things is often probably coming from a place of ignorance rather than true knowledge, because the universe is so vast and so much bigger than us. To think that we can, in one sense, control it is arrogance in my mind. And so I find that letting things take their own natural course is very much a view that comes from the fact that the universe is going to do what it's going to do. For example, if an asteroid crashes into Earth, there's not really anything that any of us can do about that at this moment. There are forces well beyond humans that, at least at this point in human history, we have no control over, including things simply as the weather, right? That there are really human, earthly things that we interact with daily that we have no control over. And the planets really represent that. And if we, not just the planets, but outer space in general really represents that. And by reminding myself daily of how small and limited I am, I can, in one sense, allow the natural things around me take their course, that I don't have to be too bothered one way or the other if this falls and breaks a leaf or ends up dying, that there are ways the universe takes care of itself, and that I don't need to try to force anything one way or the other, and that if it works out, it works out, and if it doesn't, it still works out, because my mind of what is the right way is probably wrong. So yeah, I would say that this new collection in many ways represents the next evolutionary step in Dirty Roots, and how I want to represent all of those things that inspire me, from the universe to the soil biology underground, and how our place in this is limited yet magical if we just sit back and watch it all unfold. So this is what I'm trying to get across in my creations, and I think that this is a step closer to that than I've ever done before, and I think that it really helped push me as an artist, and I think we'll see a lot more deviations, but still representations on this same theme. I think it's a theme that I will find endless fascination in, and that there are facets that I can always explore. So I think I'm gonna do a slightly different avenue with the next collection, we'll see, but for now, this is really, to me, the best representation of my ideas thus far. So this is getting close, but there's definitely a lot of space in there I still have to fill in. So we'll try to get that full of soil as well, so that everything is nice and firmly planted and beautiful. Definitely say this is my favorite sphere in the entire collection. I'm gonna plant it up with one of my favorite plants of all time, which is the asparagus fern. I think it looks really cool. It can kind of look like miniature trees fairly quickly, but can also grow really bushy, as you can kind of see behind me here and here as well. But I think we're gonna thin it out, make it a little bit more otherworldly looking. And this one here, like the other one, there's definitely some gaps and stuff that we can play with. So we'll finish this up as we talk about the last little bits here, but this is definitely my favorite of all of them for sure. I definitely learned a lot with this collection. One of the things in particular I would say is to trust myself more. It was a really good reminder that when I just have fun, things tend to work out a lot better than when I try really hard to make something fantastic and good. And so I really appreciate the way that this has turned out. And I'm excited, particularly once this is planted, to see the final collection all laid out. This has been really fun, and I'm really excited to see how this then translates now and in the future. I hope one of the ideas that you get from this collection is that indoor plants don't just have to be strictly about the plants, that they can represent larger ideas and concepts, and that they can be used to express the things in life that we are really interested and fascinated by. That plants are great by themselves, but they're also great as a symbol to represent things beyond just the plants and beyond just ourselves. So I hope that by explaining this a little bit, you get a better sense of that. And we'll see if I can achieve what I've set out to try to do. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to follow along, and I'll see you in the next one.